You know that feeling when you come back from a trip earlier than planned, hoping to surprise the person you love, and you end up being the one surprised? Yeah, I walked in to find my wife in tears, paramedics in the living room, and a stranger covered in blood lying on our floor. What looked like an accident turned into a story of betrayal, uncovered in the most unexpected way that changed everything. Let me tell you the whole story. But first, make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit that bell. Your support helps this channel grow and helps more men like us find strength and resilience through stories like this. My name is Jacob Lawson. I'm 38 years old, and I work as a senior sales rep for medical equipment in Columbus, Ohio. It's a job that keeps me on the road all the time, 3, sometimes 4 weeks a month, visiting hospitals and clinics all over the Midwest. Laura, my 35-year-old wife, teaches English at the local high school. She's outgoing, smart, and always knew how to make our house feel like home, even with me being away so much. For years, our marriage worked just fine with that routine, until the subtle signs of a silent revenge against a cheating wife started to make sense. You know that moment when you start feeling something has changed, but you just can't quite put your finger on what it is? Laura always seemed distracted, like her mind was somewhere else. Our phone calls when I was on the road became mechanical. Did you get there okay? Everything good over there? I gotta hang up. She was always in a hurry, always with something urgent to take care of. It wasn't coldness. It was more like she was constantly far away, and it gave me that strange feeling of talking to someone who was there physically but mentally in another world. Weekends changed too. Laura started having a busy social life. Dinners with coworkers, school events, outings I was never part of. "You're always tired from traveling," she would say when I asked if I could join. That was true, but there was something in the way she said it that sounded rehearsed, like she'd memorized the answer. I started wondering when exactly our connection began to wear down like this, and if I was missing something important. That particular week in Detroit had been a productive one. I managed to close an important deal 2 days ahead of schedule, a negotiation that could lead to a big promotion. So I decided to fly home Thursday night to share the good news with Laura, and maybe spend some quality time together. I tried calling her in the afternoon to tell her about the early flight, but she didn't pick up. I left a voicemail saying I'd be home around 9 that night. She was always busy after school, so I didn't think much of it. Driving home from the airport that night, I felt genuinely hopeful about us. It had been a while since I'd planned a surprise for Laura. Maybe that was exactly what we needed to get back to how things used to be. The thought of coming home 2 days early had me excited in a way I hadn't felt in months. Never in a million years did I think that turning onto our street that night, I was about to find out something that would completely change the way I saw the person I had married. The flashing red and blue lights bouncing off the parked cars made me slow down before I could even see the house number. 3 squad cars, an ambulance, and neighbors whispering with their arms crossed painted a scene that didn't belong in our quiet Columbus suburb. I got out of the car with my legs tight and tense, wondering if some misfortune had struck someone in the neighborhood. A second later, I realized all that movement was focused exactly on our front door. My stomach clenched. On the porch, a paramedic raised his hand to stop me. "Restricted area, sir." I told him I lived there and desperately searched for Laura with my eyes. He nodded but added in a low, serious tone, "Go in slowly. There's a lot of blood on the floor." Those words sent a chill down my back worse than the cold night air. I took a deep breath and pushed the door open, completely unprepared for what I was about to see. Inside, our living room was unrecognizable. The coffee table shoved against the wall, towels soaked and scattered all over the rug, medical equipment gleaming under our lamp. In the middle of the chaos, a stranger was getting treated, his face almost unrecognizable from the blows he had taken. Right next to him on her knees, Laura was holding the man's hand, crying like she was losing someone from her own family. I had never seen her show that kind of emotional closeness with anyone outside of our circle. His name was Kyle Reed. A young officer walked up to me with a notepad already open. "Are you Jacob Lawson? Your wife said you were out of town for work." I nodded, still trying to process that surreal scene unfolding in front of me. Before I could even ask a single question, Laura looked up and saw me standing there. Instead of the relief I expected to see on her face, there was pure terror, like my presence had just made something that was already fragile a lot worse. Jacob, you came home today? Her voice was visibly shaking. He's a friend. He was attacked right at our door. I just did everything I could to help. She was speaking way too fast, tripping over her own words, and instinctively let go of the injured man's hand in a guilty reflex. Right at that moment, an uncomfortable suspicion started forming in my mind. Was I witnessing a story of betrayal revealed by accident? Could it be that my own home was hiding a secret even worse than that injury? You know that moment when time slows down and every heartbeat turns into a drum pounding inside your chest? That's exactly how I felt, torn between running to Laura or staying frozen so I wouldn't collapse in front of everyone. She was wiping her face in a clumsy rush, still kneeling beside the stranger. The metallic smell in the air burned my nostrils, but what really hurt was the silence that settled between us. Right then, I realized that when trust cracks, the loudest sound is the emptiness it leaves behind. An officer tried to break the tension while jotting down my information, and I answered on autopilot, scanning the room with my eyes. 2 wine glasses, our red wine we saved for anniversaries, sat on the sideboard still wet with condensation. The cork, tossed on the rug, stood out against the dark stains that were slowly drying. Nothing about that scene looked like random violence. It felt more like an interrupted meeting. A chill crept up my neck, warning me that this story had layers. Laura asked me to take her to the hospital. I agreed with a restrained nod. As we left, I noticed the zipper of her dress tangled with a strand of hair. A tiny detail that after 11 years of marriage screams like a siren. Right after that, a strong men's cologne hung in the hallway. It wasn't my deodorant, and it definitely wasn't something from an ambulance. Rage started to bubble under the shock, even though I still didn't know exactly where to aim it. In the car, the 15 minutes to Riverside Methodist stretched like hours. Laura stared out the window, nervously twisting her wedding ring. Between gripping the steering wheel and exhaling through my teeth, I could feel indignation swelling inside me, demanding to be heard. Every time I wanted to explode, the image of that bloodied man cut in front of my thoughts. Who was I supposed to save first, him, her, or me? I parked at the ER entrance and sat there for a few seconds with my hands on the wheel, trying to line up my thoughts. Laura jumped out before I even turned off the engine, whispering on the phone. Not with 911, but with someone who sounded desperate for an update. Her reflection in the glass showed swollen eyes, but dry. My anger now had company. Suspicion. There were more people involved in this mess than I had imagined. I followed her inside, feeling like every step was pushing me deeper into a maze. I wanted answers, but I was afraid of turning suspicion into certainty. Because what if that white hospital hallway was the gateway to an affair exposed in the worst way, ready to blow up everything I called home? I clenched my fists and made a promise to myself. I wasn't leaving there without the truth, no matter what it cost. The ER at Riverside Methodist pulsed with muffled sirens, the sting of antiseptic in the air, and overlapping voices echoing down the hall. Laura disappeared among the white coats, leaving behind only the quick sound of her heels and a throbbing doubt pounding in my head. I stayed near the front desk, clutching my phone, as if it could somehow give me answers that no one else seemed willing to offer. Meanwhile, every beeping heart monitor made my own heartbeat in sync. A police officer took my information and disappeared through the restricted doors, promising to be back in a few moments. Those moments dragged on. 7 minutes on the clock felt like 7 hours in my chest. I tried calling Laura again, and once again all I got was that metallic voicemail. The strong men's cologne I had smelled in the car came back to me, and the waiting turned into a slow, painful act of self-sabotage. The harder I tried not to think, the more my mind played out scenes I had never seen before. When I finally put my phone down and took a deep breath, I noticed I wasn't alone anymore. A few yards away, an elegant woman was watching me with a calmness that felt almost unsettling. She wore a gray blazer, her hair in a perfect bun, and had that steady, confident look of someone who doesn't get intimidated easily. She wasn't a nurse, and she wasn't a cop, but everything about the way she stood there told me she had a clear purpose. My instincts told me that her presence was no coincidence. On a night like that, coincidences just didn't happen. She walked toward me with slow, deliberate steps, keeping her hands visible, like someone approaching a wounded animal. Still, every inch she closed between us only multiplied my anxiety. I noticed she was carrying a large manila folder close to her body, discreet but thick enough to hold something important. My pulse quickened. Inside that envelope could be the answers that would turn suspicion into certainty, or worse, into something I could never unsee. Mr. Lawson? Her voice was low, measured, almost rehearsed so it wouldn't draw attention. I nodded cautiously, still trying to figure out if I had seen her somewhere before. She kept her eyes locked on mine, and for a whole second the silence between us felt heavy, like she was waiting for my mind to catch up. Out of reflex, I looked for a badge. There wasn't one. She wasn't here on hospital duty. She was here on her own. She leaned forward slightly, signaling toward a quieter corner of the waiting room. I understood right away that whatever she had to say didn't belong in a crowded hallway. My heartbeat was so loud it made my own words sound far away. As we walked, I noticed how careful she was not to touch anything or anyone, as if she wanted to move through the room unseen. The folder swung lightly with each step, and every swing felt like a sinister metronome ticking with my anxiety. We sat down in chairs set apart from the stream of patients. The air conditioning was blasting cold, but the sweat on the back of my neck wouldn't let up. She rested the folder on her knees without opening it, as if she was weighing the burden of revealing something irreversible. "We need to talk about the man who came from your house," she whispered, choosing each word with surgical precision. The letters hung in the air like a fog, and the silence that followed was even heavier. In that instant, I realized I was just steps away from a line. On this side there were questions, on the other, truths that could hurt more than any physical wound. A sharp thought cut through me. Maybe I was about to stumble into a discovery of infidelity tangled with a police mystery. And if that was true, every piece of that puzzle carried consequences I couldn't predict. Even so, something deep inside me wanted to see the whole picture, no matter how dark it turned out to be. Before I could gather enough courage to ask for details, hurried footsteps echoed down the hallway. We both turned our heads at the same time. Laura appeared in the distance, talking to a doctor. The woman next to me snapped the folder shut in one quick motion and stood up. "When your wife steps away, I'll come back," she murmured, her expression calm as ever. "Don't take too long to decide if you really want to know everything." And just like that, she slipped into the crowd, leaving behind nothing but the hum of the vents and the weight of promised answers in the air. I stayed there, doubt pounding louder than any siren outside, feeling like my next move would define the rest of my life. Everything pointed to one thing. As soon as that woman came back, I'd have to choose between staying in ignorance or opening a door to truths that could destroy me. And there, in that overly bright hallway, I realized that ignorance, no matter how comfortable it seemed, was no longer an acceptable option. Rachel only reappeared after Laura disappeared down another hallway to sign some papers. Without wasting time, she opened the brown folder and spread out printed photos of Laura and Kyle hugging in restaurants, motel receipts from Dayton, and printed bank statements that added up to $42,000 siphoned off in small installments. My stomach sank. It was like watching a horror movie with my own name in the credits. Up until then, I was shaken by the blood on the living room floor. Now I realized that was just the tip of something much bigger. I grabbed the armrest of my chair before my legs gave out. I picked up a printed photo where Laura was smiling at Kyle in a way she hadn't smiled at me in a long time. "Is this real?" I asked in a hoarse whisper. Rachel nodded, and her silence echoed louder than any hospital siren. Every single picture screamed the same word: scam. My head throbbed relentlessly, trying to fit that revelation into the tiny bit of logic I still had left. My hands were shaking as I held those photos. Rachel took a deep breath and explained that her brother, Detective Eric Walker, had tracked all those transfers after noticing suspicious deposits into her joint account. When she mentioned that the couple was planning to run away the next Tuesday, I felt the air get thin. This wasn't just cheating. It was an emotional and financial robbery with a date already set. The apartment they had already rented in Cincinnati was the final nail in the coffin of my marriage. "He's my husband, but I won't cover this up," Rachel continued, keeping the documents open between us. She told me that Eric had set up a lesson meant to scare Kyle, not leave him on the edge of death. The mess was way bigger than I could process. An affair, fraud, and now a domestic police-fueled beating. I asked if Laura knew about the setup. Rachel shook her head. She only found out when she saw her lover lying on your living room floor. The shock came crashing back against my temples twice as hard. I knew I needed legal help, but my body refused to move. I thought of Phil Carpenter, a family lawyer and golf buddy. But how was I supposed to explain this over the phone right here in the middle of the hospital? Rachel noticed my hesitation and gently held my wrist. They're counting on you to lose control so they can slip away, she warned firmly. That woke up my strategic side. If their betrayal was planned, my counterattack had to be even more calculated. In that moment, something in me clicked. The hurt turned into focus. I took a deep breath and forced myself to think like a salesman closing a deal, not a husband betrayed. Every detail Rachel showed me became part of a plan I hadn't even fully outlined yet. But one thing was certain. I wasn't about to let them walk away with my dignity, my savings, or my life. Keep these, Rachel said, sliding the folder toward me. You'll need proof before they try to spin the story against you. The weight of the documents on my lap felt like holding a loaded weapon. It wasn't just paper, it was leverage. I looked up at her and asked the question that had been eating away at me since the first picture hit the table. Why are you helping me? She didn't hesitate. Because no one deserves to be blindsided like this. And because what Kyle did to me is one thing, but what he did to you, stealing your trust and your money, that's a whole different level of betrayal. Her words cut through the fog in my mind. For the first time that night, I felt a strange, cold clarity. The pieces were all on the table. Now it was my move. I gathered the photos, the receipts, and the statements, and tucked them back into the folder. As I did, I made a silent promise to myself. I wouldn't confront Laura. Not yet. They thought they'd already won. What they didn't know was that the game had just changed, and this time, I wasn't playing to protect a marriage. I was playing to win. I glanced at the clock on the wall, 11:53 at night. In less than 4 hours, my life had spun around 8 full times, and I was still trying to process the very first turn. On the back of a receipt, I wrote down, freeze accounts, change passwords, talk to Phil first thing in the morning. I slipped that piece of paper into the inside pocket of my blazer like someone hiding ammunition. Rachel gathered all the photos back into the folder and quietly pushed it toward me. In the distance, I saw Laura talking to a surgeon in a stained lab coat. Her trembling expression could have moved anyone. Anyone but the man now holding physical proof of her marital theft. I swallowed my rage, leaned my back against the cold wall, and put on the neutral face of a salesman who has already closed 1,000 tough deals. If she sensed even the smallest crack in my composure, she'd run through the first gap she found. The documents burned against my chest. Rachel touched my forearm and spoke softly. Don't confront her now. Prepare your ground carefully. I nodded almost imperceptibly, feeling the weight of those photographs in my inner pocket. The fury throbbed like a toothache, but reason was holding the leash tight. Right there I understood that my next move wasn't to scream in that hallway. It was to collect evidence, document everything, and turn betrayal into a lawsuit. This war would be fought in courtrooms, but it would be devastating. Then Rachel straightened herself and, without looking back at me, walked away. I closed my eyes for 2 seconds, took a deep breath, and straightened my tie with trembling hands. Laura finished her conversation with the doctor and turned, walking toward me with red eyes and an exhausted expression. I stood my ground, the folder hidden beneath my blazer, and my heart pounding like a war drum. Each step she took felt like the ticking of a time bomb about to go off. And that's when the certainty hit me. My response would be a silent revenge against an unfaithful wife, planned in the same secrecy she had used to steal our future. When Laura finally reached me in that hallway, I only asked if her friend was going to be okay. She nodded tiredly, unaware that the tables had completely turned. I was holding physical proof. I had an unexpected ally, and I could feel a plan starting to take shape. That folder weighed more than it looked, loaded with truths she never imagined I would find. Now it was just a matter of deciding when and how to pull the trigger. Laura stopped just 1 step away from me, her swollen eyes and Kyle's medical chart pressed tightly against her chest like a shield. I held the folder full of evidence so firmly that the metal fasteners left marks on my shirt under the blazer. The sharp smell of disinfectant seemed to try to scrub even the stale air between us. "He's going to make it," she whispered, as if that piece of information could somehow glue everything back together. I nodded without showing a single trace of emotion, letting the weight of the silence hang over her like molten lead. I led her toward the vending machines where the hallway curved and our conversation would be out of everyone's earshot. She followed with short steps and rounded shoulders, avoiding eye contact, but still catching awkward glances from people passing by. The sound of our shoes echoed on the polished floor, setting a grim rhythm that matched the moment perfectly. When she leaned against the cold wall, she tried to touch my arm in a gesture that once meant affection. I moved back a deliberate few inches. That was all it took to make it clear that whatever intimacy we had died back in that blood-soaked living room. Why was Kyle in our house last night? The question came out steady, sharp as a scalpel. Laura blinked fast, searching for some kind of mental script that could save her. He said someone was following him. He needed a safe place to stay, she answered, her voice reaching for something convincing. The story was so slick, it slipped right off, before she could even finish the sentence. I kept my gaze locked on hers, waiting patiently for her version to collapse under the weight of its own nonsense. I decided to pop the balloon all at once. "And what about the 2 glasses of our best wine on the coffee table?" Her face went completely pale under the cruel fluorescent lights. She scrambled for a way out. I opened the bottle to try to calm him down after the scare. A decent excuse if I hadn't already seen the romantic dinner receipt from just a few hours before the incident. The nervous sheen of sweat on her forehead revealed cracks running deep through her mask. The patience I had carefully guarded for 11 years of marriage sharpened into a scalpel. I cut deep without needing to raise my voice. I opened the folder wide and spread out the photos, bank statements, and receipts over the plastic hospital chair. Laura instantly recognized herself hugging Kyle at romantic restaurants. She stared at the spreadsheets showing $42,000 already drained in small amounts. Her eyes widened even more when I pointed to the sections of our accounts where over $500,000 more was waiting to be siphoned. "This was just the beginning, wasn't it?" I asked with surgical calm. "You two started small, testing the withdrawals, then planned to take every last cent." That number echoed off the white tile walls like a judge's gavel striking down a final sentence. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Just a shaky breath, a hollow exhale that told me everything I needed to know. "You were planning a future," I continued, my voice steady. "Just not with me. A future built with my money, with my trust, in my own house. And you still thought you'd get away with it." Laura's hands trembled on the medical chart, and she pressed it tighter to her chest, like if she held it hard enough, it could shield her from the evidence laying open in front of her. "You know what the difference is now?" I said, leaning just slightly closer so she couldn't escape my words. "Now I'm the one with the plan, and I promise you, whatever you thought was going to happen next, forget it. It's over. You just don't realize it yet." For a second, the hallway was so quiet that I could hear the hum of the vending machine. Laura stared back at me with wide eyes, realizing, maybe for the very first time that night, that I wasn't there to argue. I was there to end it. Her legs completely gave out. She sat down without a trace of grace, letting Kyle's medical chart hit the floor with a dry thud. Thick tears rolled silently down her face, no longer from guilt or regret, but from sheer fear of what was coming next. I stood at a safe distance watching her the way someone looks at the smoking ruins of a building they once called home. Part of me wanted to scream every curse word I knew, but I chose to save my voice for the courtroom. Emotional control was worth gold in that crucial moment, and I knew it. She tried to negotiate with a trembling voice. "Let's go home and talk without this humiliating audience." I answered flatly that the police still needed my official statement, and the hospital was waiting for payment guarantees for all those expensive procedures. That was true, but the real reason was that I needed the rest of the night to freeze every account and change every password that mattered. Her request hung there in the cold air, swaying like a broken light bulb in an abandoned room. I could see in her face that she finally understood she no longer had control over anything. A nurse in scrubs appeared, calling out, "Mrs. Lawson, to give her Kyle's full medical update. She stood up slowly, struggling, and before leaving, she threw me a look that mixed desperate pleading with raw, genuine fear. I didn't return a single ounce of compassion. I kept my face as neutral as an ice mask. Watching her disappear behind the double doors was all it took for my pulse to settle into a manageable rhythm. The hard folder pressed to my chest now weighed less than the bitter disappointment I had been unknowingly carrying for years. I checked the wall clock, 12:47 a.m., still hours before dawn. I typed a short, sharp message to Phil Carpenter. Sunrise, dead serious. My life depends on this. I set the phone to silent and slid it into my inside pocket. As the sending icon blinked, I realized that every single piece of this puzzle was finally in my hands. Now it was my move on the board. The hospital hallway returned to its background noise of monitors and footsteps. But inside me there was only a cold, almost clinical calm. I turned in my visitor badge at reception, told them my wife would remain with the patient, and headed to the nearly empty parking lot. The cutting cold of the early morning hit my face as I hugged the folder close to my chest, hearing the paper inside creak, like the gears of justice about to turn. Each step away from the ER took me further from being a bystander and closer to becoming the author of my own reconstruction. In the rearview mirror, the red hospital lights shrank until they disappeared. But the certainty of being at the heart of a classic story of betrayal mixed with a police mystery burned brighter than any siren. At 1:05 a.m., the engine roared to life. The rest of that night belonged entirely to plans that would leave no room for new lies. Early that morning, the sun painted the parking lot outside Phil's office with a pale orange glow, while I waited in the reception area, the folder of evidence resting on my lap. He arrived on time, tie crooked, eyes still puffy with sleep, but carrying a briefcase that promised final legal solutions. On the mahogany table, I laid out every piece of evidence: photos, statements, receipts that proved the full financial betrayal. Phil let out a low whistle as he looked over the numbers. $500,000 at stake is no joke to an experienced lawyer. In less than 2 hours, we filed for asset division, froze all accounts, and submitted a criminal complaint against Kyle for marital fraud. The divorce was finalized 3 months later, with Laura losing any right to alimony thanks to the evidence of infidelity and attempted theft. Kyle agreed to a deal: 2 years of house arrest and full repayment of the stolen money, paid in monthly installments that still eat away at his paycheck. Eric Walker was never formally charged. The random attack case died for lack of witnesses, exactly as Rachel predicted. Phil also blocked any future appeals from Laura, making sure my assets stayed untouched. Justice can be slow for some, but it moves fast for those who come prepared with a well-documented case. 6 months later, I sold the house in Columbus and moved to Cleveland, taking over as regional manager at the same medical equipment company. My salary went up 30%, my travel time was cut in half, and I discovered that sleeping alone is better than sharing a bed with lies. Over time, I started dating a nurse from Cleveland Clinic, a woman who splits the dinner check and never touches my phone. Trust grew again on clean ground, free of the landmines of the past, and I realized that new beginnings don't need a fanfare, they just need to be real. Today, 3 years later, I can honestly say that night at the hospital was the best nightmare of my life. I learned that blind trust is a dangerous luxury, that documents matter more than promises, and that the best silent revenge against an unfaithful wife is rebuilding a better life far away from her. I'm no longer the naive Jacob who sold medical equipment while his wife sold lies. I'm someone who knows his own worth and will never again let anyone diminish it for emotional convenience. And now I turn to you, yes, you, who followed every twist and turn of this story. Now you know how much it hurts to find out that trust can be broken, whether it's through bank fraud, infidelity, or that investment that went up in smoke. Tell me, have you ever been through something like this? Do you know someone who has? Share your story in the comments. Your words might be the map someone else needs to escape the same maze. If these reflections on emotional scams, financial losses, and brave new beginnings resonated with you, hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell. Every day I bring real stories of people who turned huge disappointments into fuel for change. Stay strong on your journey. Truth and dignity always find their way even when everything seems lost.